Deep underground. Really deep underground. Keep going.
Too far, back it up. Okay, that looks right.
Happy Halloween! Given that last year I spent a little too much time playing as a plant's guinea pig, I figured this year I'd switch it up and I would play scientist, with a very specific experiment in mind. We are going to look at the Resident Evil lightgun spin-off games, and our experiment is to see, is the concept any good? First up on our tour is going to be this, Resident Evil, the Umbrella Chronicles for Nintendo Wii. Released in November 2007, this tasty little number is a recap of Resident Evil 0, 1 and 3, plus some bonus missions to fill in a few story gaps left between some of the later titles, bridging the overall plot together. We'll dive deep into those in a moment, but first, the gameplay itself. It's a very straightforward setup, with the player aiming with the Wii Remote and using the nunchuck to point the camera within the limited setup. Like most light gun games, this is quote-unquote on rails, meaning that you just need to worry about aiming and shooting everything that moves. The gunplay is oddly satisfying, and the weapon variety is quite good. Across all campaigns, you of course have pistols tailored to your individual character, but also shotguns, machine guns, grenades, magnums, all manner of things.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
Small problem with that, Barry. Everything you shoot at in these games is, for the most part, already dead. Fucking... On that note, the stories of RE0, 1 and 3 have been severely cut down to better suit this style. This game is not only designed to be a good light gun title, but also to be baby's first steps into the wider Resident Evil franchise, and for the most part it does a very good job, and Capcom knew this, releasing the Resi 1 remake and 0 with new play control on the Wii around the same time. And to be honest, it worked. This was my gateway game into Resident Evil, since it came out when I was 15. After this, I picked up copies of Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, I grabbed a copy of Resident Evil 3, Code Veronica, I also grabbed a copy of the Resident Evil 1 remake, which thoroughly recommend that one by the way. It's a great jumping off point for anybody who's interested in the series. The real focus here is the original plot content, focused primarily around the perspective of fan favourite Albert Wesker, giving clues to his, until this point, rather mysterious motives. In 0, we see him and Birkin try to cover up their tracks prior to the mass outbreak, setting up the STARS team for the mansion incident, and also meeting Sergei, our primary antagonist. Well, antagonist to the overall antagonist of the series? Antagonist squared? Is that a thing? I feel like that's a thing. Sergei is a very high-ranking Umbrella commander who seems to pull a significant amount of weight, to the point that he has his own security detail, these tyrants with sunglasses right from the early 90s. First appearing at the end of Wesker's missions during 0, he makes it very clear. He is the leading man for the upcoming mansion test, and also willing to continue on to reach his goals of undying loyalty to Umbrella, to the point where it quite literally leads him to the end of the earth. He's seen numerous times, and his whole thing is to cover a few plot holes, namely how Wesker gets access to all of Umbrella's data by the time Resident Evil 4 rolls around. TLDR version, he went to the mansion at the start of the night to retrieve the super project known as Talos, which was then subsequently hidden in a secret facility deep in the Russian tundra. Fun stuff. Speaking of Russia, this scenario is super fun, with Chris and Jill raiding during a blizzard, and Wesker in the background taking care of Sergei to retrieve the Red Queen. Honestly, the whole game is a double love letter to both newcomers, who can get a good grasp of the major events of the first part of the series, as well as old-timers getting all sorts of extras and bonus lore. A standout level is one where you play as Ada Wong, escaping Raccoon City after the events of Resident Evil 2, teasing a certain sequel. And yes, so far, our little experiment is a success. This is incredibly stable. I'm not going to drink it, but it's very, very stable. But what happens if we mess with the formula and add one too many components? Yeah, I'm not drinking that. 3 years later, Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles showed us what happened when you take something good and ruin it by focus testing it on 14-year-old boys filled to the brim with Red Bull. Unlike the free scenario choosing we had with the first title, Darkside instead opts to go for a more linear approach. This time around, we follow Leon S. Kennedy in the gap between Resident Evil 2 and 4, investigating a South American warlord right out of a bad 80s film. No, really, look at him. He's even sporting what I hope is just a dodgy wig. Joining Leon is fan favourite Jack Krauser, again, before becoming a baddie in Resi 4, again, trying to tie up some plot holes from the series. Unlike Umbrella Chronicles though, Darkside does this in quite a ham-fisted fashion, and honestly the problem is that, well, the first game did such a good job of taking care of all the plot holes in the series to that point. By now, they'd all sort of been taken care of, so how do you make this one worthwhile? The answer? Totally changed the presentation style to be a found footage-esque horror shooter, complete with fuzzy filter and incredibly shaky, jerky camera. I will be honest and upfront, I intensely dislike this style in a rail shooter. It can work in a horror game, like Outlast would be the example that sticks out in my mind, but here it just feels wrong. I know it's weird to complain about the lack of control in something that's on rails, but that's what it feels like the game is wresting away from you. With how shaky it is, it's very hard to aim in certain scenes, and it's constantly cutting away from action while you're trying to get shots off. On the plus side, it's now a lot easier to get critical hits and headshots, but the game feels so awkward that it almost doesn't matter. Basically, you don't. Unless you want one very specific thing. In South America, Leon fills Krauser in on his experience dealing with BOWs, which conveniently is a setup for a flashback to the events of both Resident Evil 2, and when it's revealed that we're dealing with the Veronica virus down in South America, Resident Evil Code Veronica. The two levels are irritating, to say the least, due to the aforementioned camera issues. Plus, I'm pretty sure that certain scenarios against Birkin are totally broken, but the real cherry on top is that this is the closest we've ever gotten to a proper remake of Code Veronica. Just saying, Capcom, if we can give it a proper do-over, in the way you've done 1 through 4, I would be a very happy camper. It's kind of screaming for it as well. Like, Code Veronica has not aged particularly well, and it would be the perfect candidate. It's kind of the point in the series where more action came into play, so yeah, I'm just saying, make me happy, Yeah, I'm a loyal customer. It's nice to see this game get a little love, even if it is in a very flawed package. I will say that certain scenarios are a lot easier, namely the turret fight on the cargo plane, but be assured, Steve, the secondary character, is still an unbearable twat that makes me wish that friendly fire was a thing here.
Why not give him a hand?
No time for jokes!
Sadly, that's where the good bits end. The presentation style honestly gives me nausea if I play this too long. There's a lot of technical issues with frame rates just dropping and freezing, and it's very clearly from the era of RE games that would eventually give us 6. I cannot recommend this one. Sorry, people. If you want a good light gun game on the Wii, and you've played House of the Dead Overkill to death, go for Umbrella Chronicles instead. Even the final boss in this is an over-designed mess, which honestly, yeah, that's a great metaphor for the entire thing. Now, there are other light gun games in the series, namely Dead Aim for PlayStation 2, but sadly I don't have access to them. But because you've been good, and because I feel like it, we're going to do a bonus this Halloween. And also because I can't think of another time to speak about this game, we're going to do Resident Evil Survivor. As a reward. As a treat. The final PS1 Resident Evil game, Survivor, is, well, it's different. It's a first-person shooter with the same graphical style as the classic games that, weirdly enough, was originally meant to be a light gun game. I can't imagine how that would work. Would we be switching control styles throughout? Would it be like an RPG where the battles load in? So what we're left with is a weird hybrid between the two styles. Now, we know from later games, namely Resident Evil 7 and 8, that this concept can work, and work well. However, this was, well, the best part of 20 years before those games, and there's a lot to be desired. You walk, encounter baddies, and then press R1 to awkwardly aim a reticle while you stand on the spot to shoot. I get it. This was firmly in the tank control era of survival horror, and a little before we had established standards for how console FPS games should control. What's interesting is that the first Resident Evil game, for much of its development, was intended to be in first person before it was switched to third person. Unlike those prior games though, this one feels like a very dumbed down experience. The best metaphor that I can think of is that 1 through 3 are kind of like a layered Sudoku puzzle, while this is like a kid's word search. Let me elaborate, starting with the plot. We open on a helicopter crash and that's all the information we're given. There's a pleb on the ground, a gun, and a zombie. Also, our nameless generic man here has a killer headache with no memory. There's no time to dawdle though, you've got to get on with it, and get on with it the game certainly does. Unlike the methodical, plodding pace usually associated with these games, this one just sort of lays it out all in front of you. Find a locked door? Chances are that the key is, well, right next to it. Do you need answers on a character you just saw? Here's a document filled with their thoughts and feelings. Not sure where to go? Just go where you haven't gone yet. It really is that simple. And to cap it off, this game is short. Like, really, really short. I finished my first playthrough of this game in about an hour and 45 minutes. That short. The actual story is very simple. Our playable character here discovers that he is Vincent, a high-ranking Umbrella commander guilty of all sorts of horrible acts and war crimes, and tries to put things right by saving 2 children. Or, at least, he thinks he's Vincent, until near the very end, where it's discovered he's actually a reporter named Ark Thompson, sent in under the request of Leon to investigate an Umbrella-run island facility right as shit hits the fan.
That's right. At the request of my friend Leon S. Kennedy, I came here to investigate. Oh yes, I remember everything.
This was also in the time with video game voice acting where, they hadn't quite worked it out yet. There's no way around it, the game is bad. The controls are awkward, what little of a story there is to be had is paper thin, and the enemies are incredibly easy to cheese. The few boss encounters there are give you no pause, and the horror element is all but devoid. Not even a recurring cameo from Mr. X can save this one. It's one of the worst things a short game can be, and that is boring. It's quite the achievement to make me feel like I've wasted my time when your runtime is less than the average movie. If you need a little more PlayStation 1 Resident Evil, sure, give it a shot. But I'd recommend that you look at something like Vaccine instead. Even the final boss fight, a 3-part turret encounter, is dull as dishwater, even if I do like the design of the first stage. It feels a bit too, tired. You can tell that this was made inexpensively and quickly just to get some final cash out of the PS1 user base before Code Veronica hit the Dreamcast. And to make matters worse, it's not a cheap game either. Honestly, that money could quite literally be better spent on anything else. Okay, maybe not quite anything else. Good night, happy Halloween.